In the spring of 1814, when London shimmered with triumph after the fall of Napoleon, Lady Eleanor Harcourt stepped from her modest carriage onto the glistening pavement before Carlton House. Rain had washed the city clean, leaving lantern light quivering across puddles like scattered shards of gold. Yet as she paused beneath the grand archway, her breath tightened. This was her first appearance in society after 7 years of seclusion, and she felt the weight of every curious eye before she even crossed the threshold. Her gloved fingers trembled slightly as she lifted her skirts and entered, wondering whether she was foolish to believe she still belonged to this world at all. Inside, the ballroom swelled with music and laughter. The marble floors gleamed beneath spinning couples, and chandeliers dripped with enough crystal to rival a frozen waterfall. Eleanor advanced with careful steps, her dark blue gown whispering against the polished floor, though she felt every movement watched. A pair of young debutantes, their cheeks flushed with the innocence of their first season, whispered behind feathered fans. One murmured, rather too loudly, that some widows ought to accept the quiet dignity age granted them. Eleanor kept her chin lifted, though her heart tightened at the sting hidden behind the comment's poised smile. She moved toward the portrait gallery, seeking refuge in its dimmer corridor. Her heart beat with restrained urgency, a reminder that she had not forgotten what it felt like to be wounded by society's careless tongues. As she paused before a painting of a long-dead duchess, she reflected on how quickly the world dismissed a woman who no longer served its vanities. For 7 years, she had managed her late husband's estate in Yorkshire, far from the gossip that buzzed like flies around London's nobility. Her return was not a bid for admiration. It was a reluctant step back into a life she had once known, yet barely recognized now. A stir rippled through the corridor, and Eleanor turned to see the young Duke of Ashbourne approaching. Adrian was spoken of endlessly in Parliament and drawing rooms alike. At 25, he carried a promise that made even seasoned statesmen lean forward when he entered chamber. Tall and deliberate in movement, he possessed a quiet authority rarely found in men twice his age. Eleanor had seen him only in passing, always surrounded by eager admirers. She never expected their paths to cross in any meaningful way. Yet now he slowed, his gaze settling upon her with a quiet, unreadable intensity. For a moment, she wondered if he had mistaken her for someone else. But no, his eyes held purpose, not confusion. He inclined his head in greeting, his expression softened by something that almost resembled concern. She felt a ripple of unease mixed with curiosity, a sensation she had not known in years. "My lady," he said, his voice low enough to respect the corridor's hush, "forgive me, but you appear distressed. May I be of assistance?" The earnestness of the question stunned her. She searched for an answer that would neither burden him nor expose her humiliation. "I assure you, Your Grace, I am quite well," she replied, though her voice carried a faint tremor. "The ballroom is merely overwhelming after such a long departure from society." Adrian's brow tightened slightly. "Crowds can be unkind," he said, glancing toward the distant laughter echoing from the ballroom, "especially to those they do not understand." His choice of words unsettled her, for they suggested insight beyond politeness. She did not know how to respond, unsure whether to retreat or remain. She found herself studying the quiet steadiness in his expression, a steadiness that felt startlingly like recognition, though she could not imagine from where. Before she could gather her thoughts, the rustle of silk and the sharp scent of perfume announced the arrival of Lady Montfort, a woman renowned for her talent in turning whispers into open wounds. She swept past with a pointed glance at Eleanor, then addressed the Duke in a tone dripping with false sweetness. "Your Grace, I was unaware you favored conversations in deserted corridors. Some might think you were hiding." Adrian's posture straightened, his voice cool. "I hide from no one, Lady Montfort." Her smile tightened before she drifted away, leaving behind a trail of insinuation thick enough to choke on. Eleanor exhaled softly, wishing she could vanish into the paintings themselves. But Adrian remained, his presence quiet yet unwavering. You should not let such comments trouble you, he murmured. She offered a brittle smile. Age makes one accustomed to them. Age has nothing to do with cruelty, he countered. And cruelty is all that was spoken. Eleanor felt her throat constrict. His unexpected defense warmed her more than she wished to admit. She lowered her gaze, uncertain how to navigate his kindness. To linger risked encouraging rumors she could not survive. To leave felt ungrateful, almost rude. At last she whispered, "Thank you, Your Grace. But I believe I must rejoin the crowd." She turned, intending to retreat before emotion overtook her. But as she stepped back into the brighter hall, she caught the unmistakable sound of 3 young ladies laughing behind her. "Look how she flees," one whispered. "Widows should not pretend to bloom again." The words pierced deeper than the first insult. Heat rose to her cheeks, humiliation swelling like a bruise. She quickened her steps, desperate for air, desperate to escape the tightening net of ridicule before it strangled her composure. Yet just as she reached the far end of the hall, a voice halted her. "Lady Eleanor." She stopped. Adrian had followed, his expression resolute, his eyes lit with something fiercely protective. "Why?" he asked softly. "Do you flee a room that is unworthy of your presence?" The question hung in the air like a suspended cord, fragile yet unbreakable. Eleanor felt the fragile shell around her heart shift, as though some long-sealed door had cracked open. She did not answer, for words eluded her. But as she met his gaze, she sensed, dangerously, irresistibly, that her life had just changed in a way she was utterly unprepared to understand, yet no part of her wished to escape. The morning sun slanted through the tall windows of Carlton House, gilding the dust motes that danced like tiny specters in the quiet. Eleanor had risen early, though her mind had not known rest. The echoes of last night's whispers, the hiss of silk skirts on polished marble, and Adrian's steady, unwavering gaze lingered in her thoughts like a melody she could not forget. She dressed with deliberate care, her movements precise, as if armor could shield her from the gossip that awaited her outside her private chambers. 7 years of solitude had taught her how to walk through a world that regarded her age as a verdict rather than a gift. Yet she had not anticipated the gravity of returning to society with every glance dissecting her intentions. Adrian, meanwhile, moved through his own mourning with a restless energy that belied his young years. Though only 25, he carried the weight of expectations like a coat too heavy for the shoulder it adorned. Parliament pressed him to marry, society pressed him to charm, and his own family pressed him to secure an alliance that would cement Ashbourne's influence for generations. Yet his thoughts betrayed him. Even as he attended to letters and council documents, even as he smiled and bowed to women who laughed at his quips, he found himself searching for the memory of Eleanor's gaze, the slight tremor in her voice, and the dignity with which she had endured humiliation without bowing. She was not the sort of woman meant to be admired, and yet she lingered in his mind as if she had claimed a space no other could occupy. By late afternoon, the great house was alive with the hum of anticipation for the evening's gathering. A charitable assembly, ostensibly to raise funds for widows and orphans, doubled as a proving ground for those who wished to stake a claim in society. Eleanor arrived, steady but aware that every whisper, every sideways glance, bore the weight of judgment. She passed women adorned in silks of vivid color and jewel-studded hair, all eyes following her with a mixture of curiosity and disapproval. A subtle heat rose to her cheeks, not for vanity, but for the awareness that every step was watched, every choice noted, and every misstep catalogued in minds eager to interpret scandal where none yet existed. Adrian, attired in a uniform polished to a reflective gleam, observed her from across the room. His pulse quickened, though his countenance remained an exercise in controlled composure. Society dictated that a duke maintain reserve, yet he found himself imagining the curve of her hand as she held her fan, the way her eyes skirted away from the boldness of younger women who sought to mock her. He moved purposefully toward her, weaving through clusters of nobles and commoners alike, until he reached the shadowed recess of a gallery lined with ancestral portraits. "Here," The two could speak without the intrusive scrutiny of the ballroom. "My lady," Adrian murmured, offering her a rare smile, "it seems society has not lost its skill in creating discomfort." His tone bore amusement, yet beneath it lingered a question, a probe into her inner strength. Eleanor allowed herself the faintest lift of her lips, though caution kept her eyes downcast. She knew that any indication of warmth would spark rumors before the candles were extinguished. "Indeed," she replied, her voice soft, measured, yet carrying the brittle edge of a woman accustomed to containing both shame and dignity. "I am reminded that appearances often speak more loudly than deeds." She let her eyes meet his briefly, and the connection held more weight than any conversation in the room could muster. It was a silent acknowledgement. She recognized him, and he recognized her. A dangerous symmetry, delicate and explosive all at once. Their conversation, though veiled in civility, bore the undercurrent of unspoken truth. Eleanor learned that Adrian had recently returned from extended service in Parliament, where his presence had been lauded for prudence and foresight. She spoke of her own years in Yorkshire, tending to an estate that demanded both her intellect and discretion, yet she offered it sparingly, knowing that any display of competence could easily be twisted into arrogance in the eyes of those who already judged her. Adrian listened, genuinely attentive, as though each word she chose to reveal was precious and sacred. By evening, the whispers had grown louder, subtle yet pointed. Guests took note of their proximity, of the easy familiarity developing between two individuals whose connection seemed to defy convention. A viscountess passed Eleanor and dropped a faintly venomous remark, loud enough for nearby listeners. "It is curious that the young duke would seek the company of a lady whose season has long passed." The words, though measured, were designed to wound. Eleanor felt the sting, but she maintained poise, the faintest trace of color in her cheek betraying the effort. Adrian, observing this, leaned slightly closer. "Do not let their voices dictate your worth, my lady," he said softly, his hand brushing against the space near hers, not touching, yet sending warmth along the path of his proximity. Eleanor felt a shiver that had nothing to do with temperature. It was the first tangible proof that her presence could awaken emotion in someone unaccustomed to such disruptions. She wanted to recoil, to remind herself that society's expectations were iron chains she could not yet escape. Yet she found herself staying, rooted by the gravity of his gaze. As the evening deepened, Adrian presented her with a small token, a botanical sketch, delicate and precise, depicting a winter rose in full bloom despite frost-laden branches. The gesture, modest but laden with intent, symbolized resilience, endurance, and admiration unspoken. Eleanor's fingers brushed the paper, and in that fleeting contact a current passed between them, quiet, insistent, undeniable. The hall's music rose, a sweeping waltz that seemed to underscore the tension growing in each stolen glance. But society would not remain idle. By candlelight, whispers turned to rumor, and rumor threatened to become scandal. The press, ever hungry for sensation, caught wind of their association. The Duke, so young and revered, appearing in a private conversation with a woman twice his age, already deemed an anomaly, became fodder for speculation. Eleanor, sensing the rising tide, considered retreat. Perhaps she should leave London once more, return to Yorkshire where no eyes could dissect her dignity, where no hand could pass along venomous comments disguised as courtesy. Yet before she could act, Adrian intercepted her near the gallery's exit. His presence was deliberate, his attention unwavering. "Lady Eleanor," he said quietly, yet with an intensity that silenced the murmuring crowd around them, "you cannot allow their assumptions to guide your steps. You have lived with courage far beyond what most dare to claim. I will not see it diminish tonight." Eleanor met his gaze fully, a wave of conflicted emotion rising. Gratitude, trepidation, and a fragile thrill intertwined within her. I do not wish to be the cause of scandal," she admitted, the words slipping in spite of her control. "And yet, Adrian countered gently. To deny yourself is a scandal far greater than any gossip society could conjure. His eyes searched hers, demanding acknowledgement, yet granting her the agency to choose. The music swelled as they lingered together, a silent truce amid a storm of judgment. Eleanor realized that she was standing at the edge of a precipice, one step backward into safety and obscurity, or one step forward into unknown peril, and perhaps unforeseen desire. The choice, though fraught with uncertainty, pulsed with the unmistakable rhythm of possibility. A final whisper of the Viscountess reached Eleanor's ears, but this time it struck her differently. The words, meant to wound, only served as a reminder that she had already survived worse. She straightened her spine, lifted her chin, and turned back to Adrian, whose expression was patient, unwavering, and charged with silent promise. As the night wore on, and the guests drifted between dancing and conversation, Eleanor understood something that no lesson in etiquette or widowhood could teach. She had reclaimed a small portion of herself simply by choosing to stand in a room that had once sought to diminish her. And Adrian, by choosing to recognize her worth despite the world's disapproval, had begun a journey whose consequences neither could yet fathom. Their alliance, fragile and unspoken, promised a confrontation not with swords or armies, but with the rigid expectations of society and the quiet, insistent call of forbidden emotion. The candles burned lower, casting long shadows across the parquet floor, and Eleanor's thoughts remained in the gallery where the Duke had offered both protection and challenge. She did not yet know the shape their acquaintance would take, nor the magnitude of feelings their shared glances had already begun to awaken. Yet she sensed, in the deepest, most instinctual part of her heart, that tonight had altered the course of her life in ways that prudence alone could never dictate. And as the final strains of music faded, she knew she would return, despite fear, because the promise of something extraordinary, something dangerously, irrevocably compelling, had just been whispered into existence. The rain had returned by dusk, drumming insistently against the leaded windows of the Harcourt estate, as if the heavens themselves conspired to wash the city of its judgment. Eleanor lingered in the drawing room, gazing at the firelight flickering across the polished oak floor. The world outside pressed upon her with whispered voices and imagined slights. Yet within these walls, she found only the quiet patience that years of solitude had taught her. She had almost convinced herself that leaving London had been the wiser choice, retreating into the safety of her estate, away from the scrutinizing eyes of both society and the Duke. Yet a memory persisted, his steady gaze, the warmth hidden behind his measured politeness, and she knew her flight would be incomplete without reckoning with it. The knock came softly, almost hesitantly, and Eleanor's heart skipped. A moment later, Adrian appeared in the doorway, his coat damp from the relentless drizzle. Water glistened in his hair, his boots bore traces of the muddy carriage roads, yet his posture remained impeccable, his expression resolute. He was a figure carved from both duty and defiance, a young man shaped by expectations yet daring to step beyond them. For a brief instant, Eleanor felt the full weight of their age difference, the society-imposed gulf of 20 years. Yet in the immediacy of his presence, such distinctions seemed trivial, almost irrelevant. "Lady Eleanor," he said, his voice low and commanding, yet threaded with an unusual tenderness, "I would not allow you to leave without speaking. The rain has not deterred me, nor will the judgment of others." He closed the distance between them, but never invaded the space she needed to remain composed. His eyes, dark and intent, searched hers as though to discern the truth of her heart. Eleanor's fingers trembled slightly as she clasped them before her. "Your Grace, the world will notice. Rumors have begun already, and I cannot bear to be the source of scandal." Her voice, usually so steady, betrayed the fragility that lay beneath her composed exterior. Adrian took a step closer, the sound of his boots on the polished floor echoing faintly. "Scandal," he said, almost with amusement, is a small thing when measured against the honesty of one's own heart. Tell me, Eleanor, do you believe that duty demands one sacrifice everything that might awaken the soul? His words hung in the room, heavier than the storm outside, more compelling than any argument she had rehearsed for years of solitude. Eleanor's breath caught. The assertion struck deeper than reproach, more intimate than flattery. She had spent decades containing desire, curbing emotion, and bowing to the invisible rules that governed widows. Yet now, standing before this young man who dared to see her as she truly was, the constraints seemed suddenly fragile. I have learned to live quietly, she murmured, to exist without claiming more than is given. Society demands so much, yet permits so little. Then it has never truly permitted you to be yourself, Adrian countered, his voice earnest, resonant with a sincerity that made the heart stumble. You have spent years crafting armor against the world, yet what you hold within is too vivid, too commanding to remain unseen. You need not shrink for anyone, not for me, not for them. She lowered her gaze, the heat rising to her cheeks, unsure whether to flee or remain. The intensity in his eyes was a mirror of her own unspoken longings, yet acknowledgment carried peril. A single misstep could ignite gossip that would ripple across every drawing room in London. And yet, she felt herself trembling, not from fear alone, but from a profound recognition that life had offered her a singular, irreproducible moment. I have long feared such proximity, she admitted, her voice a whisper. My years, my age, it ought to preclude any foolish attachment. The words were half plea, half confession, and in them lay the full weight of her solitude, her shame, and the desire that had not dimmed despite time. Adrian extended a hand, not to touch, but as a gesture of permission, a bridge between propriety and passion. Eleanor, age is a number, society is an opinion, but the heart knows neither. I am compelled, inexplicably, irrevocably, to stand with you now, in defiance of what all others might deem proper. The firelight flickered across his face, illuminating a vulnerability seldom allowed to be seen. Eleanor sensed the battle within him, the young duke torn between duty and desire, expectation and instinct. And yet, he had chosen, in this small but profound act, to honor her worth over the dictates of Parliament, over the scrutiny of peers, over the rigid hierarchy that defined every aspect of his life. I do not wish for you to compromise yourself, she said, her voice quivering with a combination of fear and longing. To be involved with a man so young, with responsibilities so immense, it would be ruinous for you. Perhaps, he murmured, stepping closer, but would it be ruinous for me to live without seeing the truth of your heart? To deny what I feel because the world prescribes restraint? No, Eleanor, I will not abide it. If the choice is to sacrifice my own joy for their ease, I choose otherwise. Her lips parted, unsure whether to speak, to flee, or to surrender. The storm outside intensified, wind rattling the windows and rain lashing against the panes as though marking the magnitude of the moment. Eleanor finally allowed herself to speak fully, a tremor of courage threading each word. Tonight. This night is mine, my forbidden night. It belongs to me alone, and no judgment, no expectation should strip it away. Adrian's hand hovered over hers, stopping mere inches from contact. Then allow me to witness it, he said quietly, reverent and unhurried. Allow me the honor of sharing it, not to claim it, but to ensure you are never alone in it. The words struck her with an intensity that left her breathless. She did not understand fully the storm they had invoked, society's wrath, the whispers, the expectations. But for the first time, she felt a claim upon her own destiny, a permission to inhabit her desires without shame. In that moment, the forbidden night was no longer an abstract fear. It was a tangible possibility, fragile and radiant. The world beyond the estate, the conversations, the gossip, the expectations, all fell away. She saw only him, and the depth of his devotion, and she allowed the smallest step forward. Hands met in a tentative clasp, not a possession, but a shared acknowledgement of courage, of recognition, of the possibility of love that had been denied for decades. The storm raged on outside, yet within, a quiet heat suffused the room, marking the beginning of an intimacy that would defy convention and endure in memory long after judgment faded. A distant clock chimed, signaling the hour, a reminder that time continued its indifferent march. Eleanor lifted her eyes to Adrian, seeing in them both the recklessness of youth and the wisdom of profound regard. "Whatever comes," she whispered, "we must proceed with care. The world is ready to condemn us." He nodded, a soft smile touching his lips, his hand never leaving hers. "Then we proceed together, not as subjects of society, but as allies of the heart." As they remained in the glow of firelight and rain, the enormity of their choice settled upon them. The forbidden night was no longer hypothetical. It was theirs to navigate with dignity, courage, and the slow unfolding of an extraordinary connection. Outside, the storm continued, yet within, a sanctuary had been found, a space where judgment held no dominion, and where two hearts, separated by years and circumstance, began to intertwine with a quiet, irrevocable insistence. The following morning broke with a fragile stillness, the mist curling around the estate like delicate lace, obscuring the garden paths and softening the world outside Eleanor's drawing room. She stood by the window, the weight of the previous night pressing upon her heart with both exhilaration and trepidation. The Duke's presence lingered still, an invisible shadow of promise that defied reason, age, and societal expectation. Letters lay unopened on the desk, each a reminder of the world that demanded she maintain silence, submission, and propriety. Yet Eleanor understood now that some truths could not be contained by ink or expectation. She had glimpsed possibility, and nothing could unmake that vision. A sudden knock shattered the quiet, and her pulse quickened. It was Adrian, unannounced and resolute, his damp coat brushing against the polished floor. In his hand, he carried a portfolio of documents, neatly bound, and a folded note that glimmered with the seal of Parliament. Eleanor's eyes widened. The intensity of his purpose was unmistakable. "You should not have come," she whispered, part admonition, part plea, though a part of her thrilled at the recklessness of his intrusion. "I came because I must," Adrian replied, his voice unwavering, yet softened by the faintest tremor of emotion. "No derangement, no expectation, no whispering counsel can dictate my actions any longer. I have made a choice, Eleanor, one that honors neither age nor precedent, but which honors truth." He laid the papers upon the desk, each one a testament to his defiance. Declarations that he had refused all proposed matches, letters of renunciation, and formal documents confirming his intention to marry only by his own desire. Eleanor studied the evidence, astonishment and relief mingling in equal measure. Her heart, long tempered by caution, skipped uncertain beats. "And yet," she murmured, "the world will not understand. The press, the Parliament, the very halls of Carlton House. None will tolerate such defiance." Her voice held the familiar timbre of concern, the careful weighing of consequence that had guided her life for decades. Adrian approached, the firmness of his steps echoing the conviction he had long denied to his own heart. "Let them whisper," he said, his tone almost playful, yet grounded in unshakable resolve. "Let them think scandal and age are barriers to connection. I have lived 25 years under expectation. Now I will live for what I choose. I choose you, Eleanor. I have chosen you." The words reverberated within her chest, a thunderclap both terrifying and exalting. She had spent her life confined by rules she had neither written nor approved, yet here was a man, not older but far wiser than his years, declaring that love, real, deliberate, unashamed, was worth more than all the dictates of society combined. She felt a tremor of tears, the release of decades of restraint, Yet she maintained her composure, a lady as always, though one whose heart had been claimed in ways both irreversible and extraordinary. "You speak boldly, Your Grace," she said softly, her voice carrying the faintest edge of amusement beneath its careful polish. "And yet, I must remind you, even the boldest declarations can falter against entrenched expectation. Are you prepared for the consequences?" Her gaze searched his, weighing courage against recklessness, desire against duty. He met her eyes steadily, unflinching. "Consequences may follow, but I have walked enough corridors of compromise. I will not compromise now. Your presence in my life is not scandal. It is truth, and truth does not bend for fear." His hand hovered near hers, a gesture of both reassurance and invitation. "Do you understand, Eleanor, that I would stand before Parliament, before kings, and before whispers of society itself, declaring that I choose you? That my allegiance is to you alone?" Eleanor felt warmth surge through her chest, a fire long dormant, ignited by this declaration of unwavering devotion. She took a deliberate step forward, her hand brushing against his. "Then you leave me no choice," she said, her voice both firm and tender. "I will accept your allegiance, not for the world's sake, but because it is mine to give, and because I can no longer deny the yearning I have carried, silent, for far too long." Adrian's fingers closed gently over hers, the touch not possessive but affirming, a pledge made in silence and fire. "Together, then," he said, the simplicity of the words belying the enormity of the act. "Together, as equals, and as partners who will honor the life we create despite the expectations placed upon us." The gravity of their union was not marked by grandeur or ceremony in that moment, but by the quiet recognition that they had both survived restraint and judgment to claim something profoundly human and impossible to revoke. Eleanor's gaze swept the room, lingering on the familiar trappings of her life. Furniture polished to perfection, portraits of ancestors whose lives had been dictated by alliances, not affection, and windows through which the storm continued to lash. The house had been her sanctuary, her prison, and her witness, yet never had it seemed so alive as it did now, alive with the pulse of defiance and desire. She turned back to Adrian, seeing in him both protector and accomplice, a man willing to forego every expectation for the sake of honesty. "I fear the world's judgment," she confessed, her voice soft, yet unguarded. "Yet, in truth, I have never felt so certain, nor so willing to face what may come." Her words were a covenant, a mutual acknowledgement that love, once recognized, demanded courage as much as it demanded affection. She had spent 45 years navigating life with care, yet now she would navigate it with courage, alongside a man 20 years her junior who had risked everything to stand with her. Adrian's eyes softened, a rare tenderness brushing his features. "Then we shall face it together, Eleanor. Each whisper, each raised brow, each penned word of disapproval will fall harmless at our side, for we have discovered what the world cannot dictate, that hearts, when brave enough, are sovereign." His words, carefully chosen and deliberate, carried the resonance of sincerity, a declaration both intimate and public in its magnitude. She allowed herself a small smile, one that carried relief, anticipation, and the quiet thrill of defiance. In that moment, the estate seemed to breathe with them, as if every shadowed corner, every polished surface, and every whisper of the storm outside conspired to bless the claim they had staked upon each other's lives. Their connection was not merely romantic. It was revolutionary in its quiet insistence that happiness could be chosen, even in a world designed to suppress it. The hours passed, marked only by the shifting firelight and the occasional gust rattling the windows. Each word spoken, each gesture exchanged, reinforced their mutual understanding and resolve. The forbidden night had been transformed from a fleeting notion of private courage into a tangible plan of partnership, of life shared despite conventions that sought to confine both of them. The storm's fury outside mirrored the storm of expectation they had tamed within. As evening fell and candles burned lower, Eleanor understood fully that her life had shifted irreversibly. The young Duke had forgotten, if only for a time, the chains of nobility, and in doing so, had offered her not only protection, but a profound recognition of her worth. She felt the heavy, yet exhilarating weight of autonomy, the ability to act without fear of judgment, and the profound intimacy that comes only when one heart is entirely seen by another. Adrian, still holding her hand, spoke once more, his voice quiet but resolute. "We shall write our own rules, Eleanor. The world may object, but it cannot dictate the courage we have found in each other. Let it watch, let it whisper, we will endure, and we will prevail." Eleanor nodded, tears of relief and anticipation welling in her eyes. She knew, with unshakable certainty, that this was the first day of a life she had long yearned for, a life shared with a man who had defied the world for her sake, and a heart that had dared to believe in the possibility of love at last. And so, in the quiet glow of firelight and the fading storm, two souls, divided by age but united in courage and devotion, embraced a future that neither precedent nor propriety could deny. Love, chosen bravely, had rewritten the rules entirely.